Okay, so the parsha of the week is, of course, Parshas Emor, which starts off with the laws of the Koyanim. The first pasuk, as you can see in front of you, is Vayirma Hashem al Moshe. Hashem said to Moshe, Emor la Koyanim b'nei Aaron, tell the Koyanim, the sons of Aaron, V'amarta aleihim, and tell them, L'nefesh lo yitama ba'amov. They should not contaminate themselves to the dead. That's how the pasuk starts off, and then, of course, it continues with some of the laws of the Koyanim, that a Kohen is allowed to contaminate himself to close relatives. The Kohen Gadol cannot do even that. There's also rules about who the Kohen is allowed to marry, and who the Kohen Gadol is allowed to marry. Then we have the laws of the blemishes of a Kohen. If a Kohen has certain physical blemishes, they cannot serve. If an animal has certain physical blemishes, it cannot be brought as a sacrifice. And then we have the Parshas HaMoyados, the section in the Chumash Parshas Emor that talks about the various holidays. And we read that, besides reading it in Parshas Emor, we read it another 3 times during the year. 4 times, I take it back, because we read it on the first 2 days of Sukkot, we read it on the 2nd day of Pesach, and we read it on the 2nd day of Shavuos. So it's a pretty good parsha to know if you happen to be a Torah reader, because you get to read it 5 times a year. So, going back to the first verse on the parsha that we mentioned already. Let me just turn off that window that's making so much noise. If I can find it. There we are. Okay, so the pasuk begins the parsha with Emor la Koyanim, tell the Koyanim, the sons of Aaron, ve'amarta aleihim, and tell them. And of course, the words here seem to be superfluous, because it could have just said, tell the Koyanim, the sons of Aaron, the nefesh le'itama ba'amav, do not become contaminated, and so on and so forth. What is the purpose of the repetition of these words? Tell the Koyanim and say to them. So Rashi quotes the Talmud in Yevamos. Here is the quote, first in the Hebrew and then in the English. Emor el ha-koyanim, that's the quote from the verse. Emor ve'amarta, the verse says, say. And say, it repeats the word say twice. Lahazhir gedolim ala ketan. That teaches us that the adults should warn the children. That means that you're telling the Koyanim to tell others. Emor la Koyanim, tell the Koyanim, ve'amarta aleihem, and they should tell others. Emor ve'amarta, tell them to tell others. And that they should instruct their children about all the laws of kahuna. We know that a parent is expected to be mechanech, to educate their children. Yes, you have a question, please.
I wanted to say, the way you read the whole sentence, it says Hashem told El Moshe,
yes,
tell to the Kohanim.
Yes.
And then he tells Aaron, and you tell them. That's already after Aaron heard it. Now he has to tell it to whoever he's talking to. Tell them, La nefesh lo yitameh be'amar.
The whole pasuk is spoken to Moshe And Aaron's name is just mentioned in order to define who the Kohanim are. Emor ala Kohanim b'nei Aaron, tell the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron,
Yeah.
V'amarta aleim, and tell them, this is still talking to Moshe, Moshe should tell them, lenefesh le'itama ba'amav,
Okay.
that they should not become
It's
tummy.
not that the Kohanim should tell it to the people.
No, the Kohanim don't have to tell this to the people because the regular people are allowed to become tummy. It's just the Kohanim that are not allowed.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So we have the general concept of chinuch, which is that you have to educate your children in the path of Torah and mitzvahs. Ezra, I'll get to you in one moment. And of course, that begins with Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam. We say in the Shema, teach your children. Teach your children. Excuse me, that's in terms of actual knowledge. But in addition, one should train them to observe the mitzvahs. And the ones that should do the training are, of course, the ones that are keeping it themselves. So if you have Kohen children and you want to train them as far as how to be a Kohen, obviously it's appropriate that it should be their fellow Kohanim, especially the parents, who are living that kind of life. They can best instruct their children as to how to live it. Because if you're not living it, it's very difficult to tell other people how to live it. Ezra, yes, go ahead.
So the question that I have is, isn't the words Bnei Aharon superfluous? Because when you say Ela Kohanim, that means the ones that have already been appointed as Kohanim. So why do you need the words Bnei Aharon? So I think that might be one of the reasons why Rashi says, tell their children.
B'nai, you mean the sons of, as in the children?
No, I'm saying it says Emor ele Kohanim, okay? And the words Bnei Aharon, as far as I can tell, are superfluous. Okay?
Because the Kohanim are Bnei Aaron.
So therefore, why does Rashi say you should tell your children? And I think the reason why is because those words Bnei Aharon, you can darshan on those two words.
I hear what you're saying. It's something that requires further investigation. Meaning to say, is it obvious that the Kohanim always refers to Bnei Aaron? And if so, then those words are extra. In which case, perhaps it means what you're suggesting, that they should tell the Bnei Aaron.
Not everybody is so lucky.
But I do wonder.
Pinchas was not Ben Aaron.
I'm sorry?
Pinchas was not Ben Aaron.
He was a descendant of Aaron. He was a descendant. In this context, it doesn't mean literally the sons. It means the descendants of. So the thing is, we do sometimes have the word Kohen mean a religious leader who's not necessarily a child of Aaron. Of course, Yisro is called a Kohen On. And we also have a verse in Shmuel where it says that the sons of David, sons of David HaMelech, who were obviously not Kohanim, because they were from the tribe of Yehuda, it says that they were Kohanim. And in that context, it's understood that it means they were religious leaders. So I'm not 100% sure. In other words, we have to examine the way it's written in other places. And if it sometimes refers to them only as Kohanim without Bnei Aaron, then your point is taken, and we would have to find a use for those extra words, so to speak. Or is it simply defining what kind of Kohanim we're talking about as in the sons of Aaron? So I'm not sure. We have to look into that. I hear you. Thank you. Okay. So once again, back to the Rashi, is lahazhir gedolim al katanim. I'm going to read the English. Say unto the priest, and you shall say unto them, say, and again you shall say unto them. This repetition is intended to admonish the adults about their children also, that they should not defile them through contact with the dead. Now, the halacha states that there's a difference between a parent and another adult when it comes to this matter of educating the children. When it comes to a parent, the parent is expected to educate at the appropriate time in all of the mitzvahs, positive and negative. When the child is old enough to understand that they should not cut their payas, that's when we give the child a haircut and we show them, hey, we're not cutting your payas because that's a mitzvah. When the child is old enough to put on tzitzis, we put tzitzis on the child. The child is enough to say the brachas, wash the hands, daven, you name it. Actually, keeping kosher we do even earlier because that's another matter entirely. So there's the aspect of educating a child to keep the mitzvahs, and then there is the aspect of not actively causing a child to do what is considered a sin. And the latter thing applies to every person and applies even to a young age. Susan, I'll get to your question in a second. So when we talk about the regular standard education that a parent has to give, that depends on the mitzvah and it depends on the age. And that's only for a parent. Nobody else needs to take it upon themselves to educate children about this, that, and the other, unless it's the teacher, because then the parent empowers the teacher to do that. Or it's somebody else that the parent would like to get involved. But it's certainly not appropriate for a stranger to go around educating people's kids unasked for. It's not their business. However, even a stranger, every Jew, is forbidden to actively cause a child to do what is considered a sin, such as feeding them non-kosher food, making them tamei, ritually impure if they're a Kohen, and so on. Yes, Susan, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question about, it says, you should not defile the children with the dead. In other words, you shouldn't bring them around the dead. But when a parent dies and there's a child that's 10 years old, you're saying you can't let the child go and do the service and do the funeral?
Parents are one of the 7 exceptions.
Okay.
There are 7 close relatives that a Kohen is allowed to attend the funeral for. And that is a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, God forbid a son or a daughter, and a wife. Those are the 7. And it doesn't just...
Daughter only if she's not married.
Exactly. The sister only if she's not married. No, the daughter is regardless.
The sister, yeah.
Yeah, the daughter is regardless, God forbid. But the sister is only if she's not married. That's correct. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, not only are they allowed to attend these funerals, but it's a mitzvah, just like a non-Kohen. It's not like voluntary to attend a relative's funeral. That's like a mitzvah. That's what that person is expected to do. And the same thing applies to a Kohen.
Excuse me for 1 second, Rabbi.
Yes, go ahead.
What if the sister is a Kohen, though?
What do you mean by that?
Her parents, her father is a Kohen.
Obviously, her father is a Kohen. If she's the sister of a Kohen, then
Correct.
she's obviously
So she's
the
allowed
daughter
to
of a
go.
Kohen.
Okay.
No,
Just wanted to get that clarified.
no, the sister is allowed to go. The sister is allowed to go to anybody's funeral, not just the 7 relatives, because these laws only apply to the male Kohanim.
I see. Okay.
The concept
you.
behind these laws, no problem. The concept behind these laws is that the Kohanim are supposed to be ready at all times to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Holy Temple. And a Kohen has to be ready, even if there is no Beis Hamikdash, there is no Holy Temple today, like there isn't. Nevertheless, the Kohen has to do their best in whatever way they can to be ready at all times to serve in that Holy Temple. And if he becomes Tameh, that makes it impossible, not just on that day, but for many days thereafter. To become Tahor, ritually pure, after contamination with the dead is a very long process. You need the ashes of the red heifer, you need 7 days, the ashes have to be sprinkled, a mikvah, it's a whole thing. So therefore, the male Kohanim who are supposed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, those are the ones that this applies to. Female Kohanos, I should say, actually, not Kohanim. The female Kohanos who do not serve in the Beis Hamikdash, although they do have certain things that they can do, they're allowed to eat the truma, they're allowed to eat certain sacrifices, and so on, but they do not serve in the Beis Hamikdash, so these laws of not becoming Tameh do not apply to them. Okay, so going back to what we're saying here, based on this verse that we've learned, the parents or anybody cannot make a young Kohen ritually impure. That means the mother of a baby Kohen wants to go to the cemetery. She wants to visit somebody who's passed away. She wants to visit their grave. She wants to pray. She is allowed to. Whether or not she is a Kohen, she is allowed to, as we've said. But, one second, I'll get to your question in a moment, Yisrael. She is allowed to, but nevertheless, she cannot take her baby with her into the cemetery because of this verse. Lahazhir gedolim alaktanim. The adults have to instruct the children, and part of that is not to actively make them tameh. If it's the parent, it's to teach them in general. If it's somebody else, it's to not actually actively make them tameh. Yes, go ahead, Yisrael.
I'm looking at the Rashi translation in our scroll right now.
Yep.
Regarding the apparent redundancy regarding Bnei Aaron, it says, I'll quote, one might be able to think that the prohibition to Kohanim not to defile themselves to the dead applies also to Halalim. But Bnei Aaron is to teach us that the offspring, the child of a Kohen who's not properly a Kohen because it was a forbidden relationship. That's why it makes the point of Bnei Aaron.
Okay, very good. Ezra, you got that?
Yes, I heard that. But
Okay, let me just clarify for whoever didn't get that. The next Rashi says that the Bnei Aaron is redundant, but it's telling you something else. It's telling you that these laws apply only to a Kohen who still has the status of a Kohen. It's not enough to be a biological Kohen. One has to have the status of a Kohen. Practically speaking, if a Kohen marries a woman that he is not allowed to marry, for example, a divorcee, the child of that union is called a Kohen Cholol, a Kohen who has kind of been desecrated from his kahuna, from his status as a Kohen. And such a Kohen is not a Kohen, and these laws do not apply. He's allowed to go to the cemetery, he's allowed to marry whoever he wants, Jewish person, obviously, because these laws do not apply in that case. Very good.
but he cannot serve.
That's correct. He doesn't get the benefits of being a Kohen, nor does he get the restrictions. They come together.
And there's no Avera involved.
No, the Avera was done by his parent. He is not
I'm
blamed.
talking about the father. The one
Yeah,
who marries the divorcee is Ivor,
Exactly.
and then the Cholol is born with not. Okay.
Exactly. The Cholol is treated like a Yisrael, like a regular Yisrael. He has not sinned. We don't blame him for the sin of his parents. The only thing is he's not a Kohen because he does not have that status. That's why the Kohen gene can be misleading. You know, they have the Kohen gene, which they found, I think, in up to 80% of Ashkenazi Kohanim. I don't really understand why it's not found in Sephardi Kohanim, because if it comes from Aaron, then why would it only go to the Ashkenazim? That I don't get. But in any case, the Kohen gene does not mean that the carrier of the gene is a Kohen, for the simple reason is that it does not tell you who the person married. It just means that he's a physical descendant of Aaron, at least in theory. You know, we don't know that for a fact, but it seems to be. But it doesn't tell you who the mother is, or the grandmother, or the great-grandmother, all the way back. And that person has to be fit to marry a Kohen. In fact, the Kohen gene can be found amongst a non-Jewish person. If the Kohen married a non-Jewish person, God forbid, the child would not be Jewish, but they would still be a biological descendant of Aaron. They might have that gene, so that's not going to do it.
Rabbi, you said that a Kohen cannot marry a divorcee.
Correct.
And yet you said that it's a okay situation that he can't function as a Kohen. How does that reconcile with each other?
No, what I said is, just to clarify, is that if he does marry a divorcee, the child of that union is not recognized as a Kohen and is also allowed to, you know, marry whoever he wants and become Tameh and so on. The parent who is not allowed to marry the divorcee, for them, it's not an option to say, I'm just not going to be a Kohen, I'm going to opt out. There's no option to opt out of being a Kohen. If a person is born as a Kohen, they need to live their life as a Kohen. And it's not an option to say, okay, I'm going to marry whoever I want. I'm just not going to be a Kohen. I'm not going to get the first Aliyah. I'm not going to duchen.
What does he lose except going to the Beis HaMikdash?
He gets a
There's
sin.
lot.
He gets a sin.
There's a lot that he loses. If the Beit HaMikdash existed, he would lose his share of the korbanot that the Kohanim would get.
That's correct.
Lechem Panim, the showbread he would get, he would lose that. So he would lose all the options of serving in the Beit HaMikdash, which is not something small.
That's correct.
But he knows when he does it.
I just want to finish off what Ezra is saying, just one second. That is correct. The Kohen who is not following the laws of Kahuna in terms of who he marries, or for that matter, if he regularly does contaminate himself to the dead, either way, he loses all of the rights of a Kohen, even though he is technically still a Kohen. So he would not get any of the gifts of the Kohen. He could not serve in the Beis HaMikdash, that's correct, until he renounces that behavior fully.
But in modern times, a Kohen goes to all kinds of circumstances to remarry a non-divorcee, and the other option that you mentioned is never discussed.
Because it shouldn't be an option. It's not a permissible option. I just said if it does happen, you know, people don't always follow the rules. If it does happen, then the child is not a Kohen. But I didn't mean to say that it's permissible to do.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you talking to me?
Can I ask a question? What time period are we talking about? Is it only in time when the temple and Mishkan were, were in existence, or because we know for a fact that many rabbis and even head rabbis of a synagogue is present in time of the funeral. That's why it's kind of, I just want to make sure that I understand what time period are we talking about.
Yes, so that's a good question. The answer is that we are talking about all times, and sorry, we're talking about all times, and just one moment, please. One moment, please. Give me 1 moment, please. Oh, honey, you want to call Eddie back because he's trying to reach me? You have his number? Okay, thanks. So the answer is that it applies to all times. Now, I want to just discuss one question that can be asked, which is that if we said that the point of not becoming ritually impure is to be able to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and nowadays we have no Beis HaMikdash, and most Kohanim have already become ritually impure at some point or another in their lives. If they ever did go to a funeral of any one of their relatives, so they're already impure, and there's no way to get rid of that impurity until Mashiach comes. So what's the difference if they go to another funeral? So the commentaries explain that when a person is in a place of impurity, in a cemetery or with a dead body, that is an increase in the level of their impurity. And as such, it's not appropriate for a person who is supposed to be ready to go to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Holy Temple at all times, to increase their impurity whatsoever. The fact that a rabbi can do a funeral is true if the rabbi is not a Kohen, because these laws only apply to a Kohen. In terms of a rabbi who is a Kohen doing a funeral, that is complicated. And what the rabbi has to do is he's not allowed to be in the same room as the deceased. He's not allowed to be in the cemetery. There are some funeral homes that make a special room for the rabbi where he's behind the glass so he can make the sermon and still not be in the same room. But he certainly cannot be at the burial itself, because then he would have to go into the cemetery, which he's not allowed to do. Yes.
I wanted to say that some of the Kohens today, they are not sure that they're really Kohens. They come into the synagogue, talk to the rabbi, tell him my father was a Kohen, and they accept it without any proof as to what happened through the generations. And
Well,
the
it's a
same for
complicated.
ladies.
What do you care what he does?
Sometimes it's just the name is a type of name that the Kohen would have, or a Levi in that case. And both of them, just because of the name, the type of last name, they would become a Levi or a Kohen.
So it is a complicated question. It's not simple. On the one hand, a person might want to be a Kohen to be able to get the first Aliyah, to be able to duchen.
Right.
On the other hand, that comes with some special laws, like we're saying, in terms of who they can marry and funerals and whatnot. So it's not so simple. And sometimes a person who perhaps was considering himself a Kohen for his whole life, all of a sudden might find themselves older and unmarried and wanting to marry a divorcee. They might go to the rabbi and say, hey, maybe I'm not really a Kohen.
No,
Who was my grandmother? Maybe my great grandmother was not fit to marry a Kohen, and they'll try to find ways out of it. So it's not a simple thing. Yeah, sorry.
Some of them come in, they didn't practice Judaism, but when the father passes away, they come in and say, oh, my father was a Kohen.
So this is something that has to be investigated. It's a case-by-case basis, and it's not a simple thing.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, make sure you don't marry one of his children.
I'm going to rush into it.
You know the story, Mr. Goldberg goes to the rabbi and says he wants to be a kohen, and the rabbi says, well, he can't be a kohen. He goes, no, I'll give you $10,000 for the shul. No, rabbi, I can't do that. No, I'll give you $50,000 for the shul. Finally, he goes, oh, okay.
Rabbi,
He announces that he's a kohen. Then he goes over to him afterwards and goes, I embarrassed myself and everything else. Tell me, why was it so important for you to be a kohen? He goes, what should I tell you? My father was a kohen. My grandfather was a kohen. I think I should be a kohen too.
Yes, I hear it. Yes.
in New York, I had an experience during the Chagim. This was an Ashkenazi Beit Knesset, attended it, and I noticed something that was very unusual. When it came to the time to duchening for the Kohanim, they all ran up to the, to say the Kohanic blessing, but none of them had their hands washed by the Leviim. It was just, they just ran up, and there were vessels there for them to wash their hands, just only a few amot away from them. You know what I'm saying? So I find this to be rather, they just ran up and they just, put the talit over their heads and that's it. They didn't even do the proper, I don't even know if they did the proper blessings,
Did they take their
They
shoes off?
did it before you saw
Hey,
it.
no. They did not take their shoes off. No, they did not. They did not take
Some
their shoes off
places
before
the
they wore
women run up also. It's okay.
They did not take their shoes off before they wash their hands. Now, this is, you say amongst the Ashkenazim that about 80% of the Ashkenazim have more of the genetics than the Sfar. I don't know if you're comparing to the Sfaradim, but the Sfaradim, when they do it every day, every day they go up and they do the Kohanic blessings, and they
And
do
the
it
place
properly.
and the place you saw was Sephardic or Ashkenaz?
No, this was Ashkenaz. I attended it, and I was really surprised because they didn't take their shoes off. There was no washing of their hands. They just ran up there and did their thing.
What about the rabbi? Was there a rabbi there?
Yeah, of course he was. Yes, of course, yes.
What did he say?
I'm not going to.
Jingle bells.
Rabbi,
in the
please
corner.
understand. No. I'm just saying, there was a big crowd there. I did not see. Of course, the rabbi was there, but he cannot make an issue out of that while this is going on. You know what I'm saying?
Maybe it was
The
reform.
only thing I'll say two things. In terms of not washing the hands, there is an opinion, which, if I'm not mistaken, the Syrian community does follow that opinion. There is an opinion that if you washed your hands before you started to daven, which you're supposed to, right?
Yeah.
Unless you,
Of course,
you
that's what
just
you're
wash
supposed to do.
Negelas or whatever. So if you wash your hands before you daven, you don't have to wash again before duchening because your hands are still clean. Now, most people do not follow that in practice. I'm just going to mute you all because there is a little bit of noise in the background. You can unmute yourself as needed. The point is that so that's number one. So I have not seen that in Ashkenazi shuls, but I believe that is the Syrian custom. So that's point number one. Point number two, and this is a very interesting thing that I came across in the responsa from the IDF. There's a book that collected the halachic responsa given to the, need to mute you all again. You can unmute yourself as needed. This was a book written to the various halachic questions that came up in the IDF. And one of the questions were, sometimes the people have to daven on the field. The tents are pitched in the middle of who knows where, and they're davening, perhaps with a minyan, on the field between the tents. And they're not in a shul, and there's mud all around them, and they're wearing their boots, and it's not practical for them to take off their shoes. They just can't. They'll get their feet muddy and there's no way to do it. So this was posed to one of the rabbis that answers the questions for the IDF. And the rabbi answered a very interesting point. The rabbi said, what's the reason why you take your shoes off when you duchen? The reason is, it says that maybe one of the straps of the shoes will break, and the Kohen will be embarrassed that his shoe strap broke in the middle of duchening, and he'll bend down to fix it, and that will ruin the duchening. But the question is, why should he be embarrassed now more than any other time of the day? Like, so what if his shoestring breaks? Like, why is that more embarrassing now than 10 minutes earlier, than 10 minutes later? What is this about? What exactly is the problem? So he explains simple, because the duchening traditionally takes place on a platform. The word duchen means a platform. And the Kohen is supposed to go up to the top of the platform, and he says the duchening with his hands raised up over the people, and that's how he duchens. Because he's on a platform, his shoes might be eye level with the congregation. And that's why it bothers him that his shoelace broke, and that's why we're nervous that he might interrupt to fix his shoe and the whole thing. So says the rabbi, if the Kohen is duchening and there is no platform and he's standing on the same level as the congregants, there's really no need to take off the shoes, because he's not embarrassed about his shoe breaking now more than any other time, and therefore it's fine to keep the shoes on. Now, the truth is that in many shuls, there's no platform, shuls that are kind of, in rented spaces that didn't build special things for the Aron Kodesh or whatever. So there's no platform, and the Kohanim still take off their shoes because that's the tradition, and why not? But in a case where their feet are going to get muddy, the rabbi said there's no need to take off the shoes. So I wonder if the people who didn't take off their shoes in that shul, Ezra, had ever read that responsa from this rabbi or not. But if there was no platform, there is room to understand what they were doing.
No, there was a platform. There was a platform.
There was a platform. Now I don't have an excuse. Okay, Yisrael, go ahead.
Just one other point. I believe there's a leniency in terms of washing your hands upon arising. I think the basic halacha is that you can only wash up to your knuckles, but the Kohanim have the leniency to be able to wash up to their wrists because of the fact that they may be duchening.
Yes, correct. You're talking about on Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, yeah.
Yes, correct. Very good. Okay, so we continue with some of the other sources that the Talmud gives for this idea that the adults also have to look after the children. Going back to the source sheet. One is also from Chumash Vayikra, a few parshias earlier, where it talks about the forbidden foods. And it says there, Loi soichalum ki sheketz heim. Do not eat the creeping animals because they are disgusting. Now, our sages read the word Loi soichalum as if it says Loi sa'achilum. Do not feed them. And again, that was said to be referring to the adults not feeding the children. Okay, like we said before, a parent has to educate the child in all matters of Judaism. But every person is obligated to not actively cause a child to sin. And this is especially relevant when it comes to the laws of kosher. It is forbidden to give any Jew, including a baby, a Jewish baby, it's forbidden to give them non-kosher food. Even though they don't understand what they're doing, they're not punishable. Nevertheless, it's an active sin. We are not allowed to actively cause even a one-day-old baby to do a sin. So when you're looking for baby formula, you need to find kosher baby formula and so on and so forth, because whatever you eat becomes part of you, and it affects you for your whole life because it becomes part of your physical body. And the negative effects of kosher food are very difficult to turn around. So one has to be careful about that even with young children. Finally, the third source for this teaching is kol nefesh mikem loy sochal dam. Any soul of amongst you shall not eat blood. That is also a verse in Chumash Vayikra. Not sure what parsha that is. It's got to be probably Acharei Mos. Probably last week we read it, I'm guessing. And why does the verse say kol nefesh mikem lo sechal dam? No soul from amongst you can eat blood. Why does it have to say no soul? It should just say lo sechal dam, and obviously Hashem is talking to everybody. So the Talmud says once again that it's to teach the adults not to feed it to the children. Okay, now the Talmud goes into some complicated discussion about why we need all of these three verses. Why does it have to say 3 times in the Torah that the adults cannot cause the children to sin? Once by the Kohanim, and once by the feeding them non-kosher animals, and once by not feeding them blood. The Talmud goes at some length to explain that. But we're not going to get into that particular discussion because it's a little bit involved. The Talmud goes back and forth. It says if we would only say it here, we couldn't learn it to there. If we would only say it here, we couldn't learn it to there, ba, 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 ba. When it says it by all 3, we can learn it to everywhere else. But we're not going to get into those details. Instead, we're just going to talk about a lesson that can be learned from these 3. The Lubavitcher Rebbe learns a lesson from the fact that we learn this idea of the adults teaching the children, specifically by these 3 mitzvahs, and we apply it from these 3 to the rest of them. Why specifically these 3? And in this context, the Lubavitcher Rebbe kind of borrows the idea of adults and children and applies it to teachers and students. And we're not just talking about adults in years and children in years, but also the teacher and the student, a person who is trying to influence others to go on the path of the Torah. So the Jewish people in Egypt, according to the commentaries, were behaving like idolaters in many respects. And one of the things the idolaters used to do in those days is they used to consume blood. And that's why when the Torah talks about not eating blood, it talks about it with very strong language, how terrible it is to eat blood and the punishment and so on and so forth. And the commentaries say because the Jewish people were so used to eating blood, they needed to be told very strongly not to do so. And the lesson is, a person might think, I can influence somebody else, but if that other person is set in their ways, and they've been behaving in a certain lifestyle for many years, then I should just keep my mouth shut I shouldn't bother them. It's a waste of time. Nothing's going to change. And that's why we learn concerning the blood specifically. No. Lahazhir gedolim alaktanim. The adults have to let the children know, both physical children and spiritual children, meaning to say people who need guidance, you have to tell them. Even if they haven't been behaving this way for 50, 60, 70 years, it's never too late. You should try to instruct them to change. The other thing is the idea of the not eating the shekets, not eating the non-kosher animals. What is the lesson to be learned from this? Trying to remember, and it's escaping me. I'm on a different computer. That's the problem. If I'd be on my own computer, I would have it open in another window. But at the
Rabbi,
last minute, I had to
wasn't the
change
reason-
computers.
Wasn't the reason for not eating certain animals was medical? Because there were certain diseases that could harm the organs of the body and kill the person.
That may have been one of the reasons. It wasn't the only reason, but that may have been one of the reasons. Okay, I'm going to go to the one of the Kohanim, and I'll get back to the one of the non-kosher animals in a moment. But the one of the,
Rabbi,
Sorry?
I saw that in the Talmud, and it said that because it's mag'il, it's something that you don't even want to look at it, not just eat it, you know. That's one of the reasons. I don't know about the
that's
other.
one of the reasons for what?
Not eating shratzim.
This I don't know. This I don't know. It happens to be that they are disgusting.
Yeah, I
But,
saw
you
it
know,
this week actually in a Talmud book. I don't remember which one though. I looked at two of them.
But it has to be
Either
more than that.
Megillah,
Because
either Megillah or the other one was Chagiga.
it has to be more than that, because the fact is that grasshoppers, many types of grasshoppers are kosher.
Yeah,
We
a
don't eat
couple of
them because we don't have the tradition, but many grasshoppers are kosher. Now, if you ask the average person, that's pretty disgusting, but the Torah says they're kosher. And maybe if we would eat them, they wouldn't be disgusting anymore because we would be used to it. So there has to be something more than just the disgustingness, although they happen to be disgusting. So I'm
I
not
want to
sure.
ask you a question, Rabbi.
Yes, I'm going to listen while I get my other computer so I can try to
Okay.
what I was saying.
What about snakes? They have scales.
they don't have fins.
No, they don't have fins, but they have scales.
No, but scales are only for fish. They're not helpful for land animals. They don't help for land animals. Okay, so to go on to why it says about teaching the youngsters about the Kohen and teaching the youngsters. Why specifically does it choose that mitzvah? Because the idea of a Kohen is a person who serves Hashem with extra strength, above and beyond what other people do. And a person might think, you know, when I'm educating somebody else, whether it's a child or an adult who needs to be educated, I should just give them the basics. I shouldn't bother trying to get them to excel and do anything extra above and beyond. Just the basics, simple, you know, keep Shabbos, keep kosher, put on tefillin, and that's enough. I don't have to tell them all the details about exactly how to keep Shabbos and what brachas to say and when to say it and all of that. That's too much. And here we see, no, that even the details of the Kohanim, which are like super mitzvahs for special people, those are also something you have to teach the children as well. And finally, number 3, Number 3 is about the non-kosher animals. Actually, this does tie into what you were saying, yes. Number 3, when it comes to somebody who eats a non-kosher shekets, vermin, we're talking about like crawling animals. It's disgusting. Who would eat such a thing? Only a person who truly wants to anger Hashem. A no normal person would do it. So clearly the person who's doing it is so far from Judaism that he's really holding by angering Hashem. How could I even attempt to reach out to them and change them? And that's why the Torah specifically says, even about shekets. Even a person who's gone so far off the path that they are presently angering Hashem, they're sinning just to anger Hashem. Don't give up hope. See what you can do to try to impact them. After all, they have a Jewish soul, and if you work on them, you can reach them as well. So that's the class. I started late, so I'm finishing a few minutes late. But now that David is back, I must give a summary. All right, my pleasure. The summary is we have to teach the children, both the physically young children and the spiritually young children. We have to teach them even to change things that they might have become ingrained to not do or to do differently. We shouldn't give up on that. We have to also teach them, even if they seem so far that they're beyond reach, never give up on them. And finally, we shouldn't just teach them the basics. We should give them enough to really excel and become super Jews. All right, thank you all for joining the class.
So thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
My
Rabbi.
Pleasure. My
Thanks,
pleasure.
everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Shoshana, do you want to just say hello? I don't know if you've been in the class before. Not in my class, at least.
No, I just wanted to say that maybe I didn't see it in the Talmud. Maybe it was one of the parashot last week or the week before.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely disgusting. There's no question about it, but I don't know if that's the reason for them to be forbidden. I'm not going to sign on to that just yet.
Rabbi, when is your next class? Is it going to be Tuesday or a week from today?
So I actually messaged Rabbi Smith that I would like to do it on Thursday instead of Tuesday, because Tuesday's Lag BaOmer is going to be a busy day for me. Let me see if he responded. Give me a second. He did not respond yet, so I will ask him to let you all know.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Have a
Thank
good
you,
Shabbos,
Rabbi.
everybody. My pleasure. Be well.
Good Shabbos. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Shabbat
Have a
shalom.
great Shabbos, Rebbe.
Thank you, you too.